All right, up next is a longtime colleague of mine, both at Harvard Business School and now here in the happier playgrounds of MIT. A super longtime colleague of ours at the Initiative on the Digital Economy, George Westerman. And we hear a ton these days about crowdsourcing and the wisdom of crowds and about the value of competition and innovation tournaments. And let's learn some more about that, and in particular, what we know about how well alleged experts do versus how well the crowd does at coming up with useful innovation. George, over to you.
Thanks, Andy. So yeah, as Andy said, this idea of the crowds as being an incredibly great source of wisdom. You hear the term wisdom of the crowd. Sandy Pentland designed this wonderful, he and his colleagues designed this wonderful thing to find 10 red balloons around the US using crowds. They found them. All kinds of great other innovation out there from the crowdsourced stuff. It's led to this slogan that the smartest person in the room probably isn't in the room. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to say, well, that's great. And we see all these different contests doing this. But when we see these contests and when we dig in a little deeper, we see some funny anomalies on the wisdom of the crowd. So for example, that Starbucks has an awful lot of crowdsourced ideas and suggestions that come in, right? And when we look at what Starbucks did, here's some of the top ones. Now sure, there's a really good one here. Sleeve recycle bin. That makes sense. That's extra paper. Let's go ahead and use that in the restaurant. And my coffee tends to cool down, so that's great. Let's look at the other three, though. Give me money. Give me money. Give me more money. So the crowd may be wise about what it wants. They're not necessarily so wise about what Starbucks wants. And similarly, we're going to talk about some data from EMC, and Calvin Smith, who runs the innovation contest, is here. When we're learning about that, the crowd favorite for one of the contest winners there was for EMC to do a cloud-based healthcare product for Rwanda. Makes a lot of sense, right? EMC could certainly do this. Rwanda would be better. Nobody's really certain EMC would be any better for having done that. So is the crowd wise, or is the crowd wise in certain ways that may or may not work for the company? And that's what we really wanted to investigate. So the other piece of it was this. What about the experts? Experts can be expected to know more about the products, more about the technologies, more about the technology trends going on for this company. They may know more about what's good for the company, but the problem is you may have 5,000 ideas and a couple dozen experts to review those ideas. So they may actually have better knowledge to do this stuff, but they're expensive and they're rare. And so how do you balance this thing out? That's what we wanted to look at. So we were looking at the contest that Calvin runs at EMC. This is an innovation conference, innovation contest they do every year. And the idea is that anybody in the company can put these ideas up there. They put them into a database. The whole company can look at them. They can like them. They can comment on them. They can do that kind of thing. Then eventually, these have turned into finalists. So the process is executives sponsor challenges, about 18 per year. Crowds submit ideas for the challenges. And then from there, the crowd can like them. And eventually, the experts go through here. They select some finalists. Okay? Now, this is about 15,000 ideas over 5 years. Okay? You can see the likes, 300 finalists. And we're going from ideas coming in to experts selecting them as finalists. We'll do more analysis later, but that's where we stand. And what we want to look at is how do the crowds and the experts compare on which ideas they select? And what can we learn from that process? Okay? So what did we look at in these ideas? They came in, first of all, we did content analysis on the ideas. So processed all of them using LIWC here. And it categorizes the words in many categories, like social, like emotional content, like cognitive content. And we just took some random text off the internet. We just thought we'd try this as an example here. So we thought we might take it from here. Okay? And when you run the word count piece in there, it gets an awful lot of words get categorized in some way. And you can see how they get categorized, right? Work-related words, social words, and the percentages you see. Now, there's certainly some emotional, some cognitive. We would hope there's some cognitive content in Andy and Eric's work, right? They do tend to use big words. It is MIT. And thank heaven, not a lot of swearing going on in there, right? So this is good. They do some good writing here. We did this for all the ideas in the database. We then also looked at strategic alignment because it might make sense for EMC to do new technology and virtualization and everything. They probably don't want to get in the business of building hamburgers, right? And so strategic alignment should matter. The way we measured this was just very, very interestingly. We took the shareholder letter that the chairman sends out every year, and we looked at similarity of words, cosine similarity between what the shareholder letter talks about and what these ideas talk about. Okay? Then we went on popularity. Maybe these things are just the talk of the day. Remember, cloud was the talk of the day. Now the talk of the day is Internet of Everything, right? And so popularity based on Google search trends, 1 million monthly observations of popularity, and the same thing. So what's the comparison between what's in the content here and what the popular terms are? And we use those as the predictors for the number of likes it gets and its choice as being selected as a finalist. So the assessment is likes and finalists. So here's what they look like. The blue ones here are the general ideas that came in. The axis to come along is the popularity. This is popularity not in terms of likes, but in terms of Google Trends popularity. Is this something that the world tends to be talking about at the moment? And then the other dimension is strategic alignment. And so these things are all over the place. You do see, they tend to correlate here. The size of the box, by the way, is the number of likes that the idea got. So we do see this. Look at the finalists, though. They're a little different. You see how they moved up and to the right. Finalists tend to be more strategically aligned, more popular. Still this odd distribution of the likes, right? That being more liked doesn't seem to be so consistent with being a finalist. But we'll see where that goes. So now we've got to, of course, we've done the graphs. We've got to give you all the numbers, right? So here is our unreadable chart. These are all the predictors we've got. We've got some good predictors in here. For example, of course, the controls for the years, controls for the size of the content, all these different things on wording and some other elements. The first analysis is an analysis, negative binomial test for the number of likes you got for an idea from the crowd. And the way to read this is, here's our first test, and then here's the 2 dimensions on that chart. And then the next one was a logistic regression to say, was this selected as a winner or not? What's the likelihood of being selected as a winner over here? Now, how to read all these numbers, here, we'll highlight them for you. What's interesting here is that the crowd seems to like content that is what we're talking about these days. The more popular it is, the more likely people are searching for it on Google, the more likely the crowd likes it also. But look at that next one. Negatively significantly correlated with strategic alignment. So the crowd's not necessarily wise about what the company wants to be doing at the moment. Okay? So let's look over at the experts. The experts actually don't seem to care what's popular. Now, that picture of the experts showed him as a heck of a nerd, right? Maybe he doesn't know what's popular, right? But they don't seem to be swayed by that. They are swayed very much so, though, by strategic alignment. Let's look at a couple other of these numbers here. The content of the ideas. The crowd really likes ideas that talk more about leisure, that talk more about money, which is an interesting one because you think money would matter here, and talk more about people, social, family, people, relations, that kind of thing. They actually do not like words that involve cognitive stuff. So Andy and Eric's book was very heavy on the cognitive. They would not like that book. Okay? So what we have here is almost the crowd really ought to be called a mob in this case, that they're going with what's popular and they're not thinking about it a lot. Now, I'm overstating it, but it's really interesting there that they seem to be swayed not only by what's popular, but by the sales pitch, which is very different from the experts. You look here now, when you look across, none of those are significant for the experts. The experts seem to be swayed on what it's about and its strategic alignment, but the sales pitch in there doesn't seem as important to the experts. Very interesting question on then which one, how do we use this stuff? Let's go back to, one more question here. The experts do seem to like the same things that the crowd does like in many cases. And so the question is, well, if the same things don't light them up, what's going on here? Is it that the experts recognize some goodness in the idea, and the crowd does recognize some goodness in the idea, but they also care about some other things? Or is it that the experts just like, the fact that the crowd likes it, they like it more? So we ran a mediation analysis. I won't get into details. What we found basically is that, no, it seems to be something inherent in the idea. It's not the fact that the crowds liked it that leads to the experts liking it. So ROC curve, just because they're a heck of a lot of fun to draw. You saw this thing from Hussein's thing before. Now, here's where the crowd goes. Remember, Hussein was saying 0.87. That's a pretty good classification regime. The crowd here is getting 0.68. Not so great. Okay? This is 0.68 on being chosen as a finalist by the experts. If we add in some other things that would be more automatic, strategic alignment, if we just went with strategic alignment, it would do better than what the crowd does. If we do popularity, it would do better than what the crowd does. If we put alignment and the crowd in there, we get to a reasonable 0.75. But of course, the experts are better in this because we're predicting that being selected by the finalists by the experts. Here's what's interesting, though. If we add the crowd to the experts, nothing changes. Huh? So there's really not a lot of effect here. So why would we do the crowd? Why would we have the crowd involved in here? Now, one thing you could say would be there's some other kinds of externalities here. It may be that having the crowd involved might just help in a social way. In fact, EMC finds that, right? That this is a big, hulking company, grown by acquisition, lots of regions. People don't know each other. They don't always speak the same languages. But they did have one of the winners was a 25-year-old guy, sales engineer, who submitted his ROI spreadsheet for buying EMC equipment. It was one of the winners. And imagine what this did to every other 25-year-old in the company, that this guy got national, global attention for what he had done. So there's this idea that you bring people together, you get them more excited, and there's also some evidence that we're getting more ideas every year. And there's something about some excitement that's generated. So there is an externality for having the crowd. Maybe that's worth doing it, and it's worth talking about, right? But another opportunity we have, and we're going to dig into this a little bit more at the moment, is if we look at this ROC curve, if we can use the crowd to cut down the ideas and make the experts' jobs easier. Okay? So instead of the experts having to review 200 or 300 ideas each, maybe we can give them the top 50. And if they do that, they can pay a lot more attention to those 50 and get it right, as opposed to click, click, whatever you're going to do with 300 of them. Okay? And so what we're doing is we're going to look here. If, for example, we were willing to accept a 50% false positive rate from the crowds, you go here and you say, well, the crowd's here, experts are there. We may only lose 10% of the good ideas by cutting the bad ideas by a factor of 8 or 9 in this analysis. And so we might lose a little bit, but save so much in efficiency that's worth it. So we're going to look into that and say maybe there's another value for having the crowd involved. Okay? So what do we find? We do have the heart and the mind going on here, right? The crowds can be motivated by ideas other than value. The experts tend to focus on priorities more, but they're going to have their own biases too. And they're also very, very expensive to get them involved. So can we reduce the need for the resources without losing product quality? We think we can. And we're going to do a lot more work here now on that, going through to winners and some other things to take this through and learn even more from this process. Right. So any questions? Yes? Sorry, I can't hear you. Talk louder.
Of the people who submitted ideas during this process, is there any data on where they fit in the company?
They are all over the place on the company. Yeah, they're really all over the place on the company. They tend to, there's some geographic challenges, and they tend to cluster by geography. But most of these tend to be people from all over the place that have ideas. And in fact, there are often these teams that come together. We'll have a marketing person and an engineer will get together to launch an idea. And those tend to work pretty well, too. We haven't looked at it yet. So, well, anyway, it was the last bullet on the slide there. We definitely want to look at that and find out. Good. We're seeing evidence also of serial innovators that come out of nowhere and win 2, 3, 4 years out of 5, which is really interesting.
Did they do any analysis on the business?
So this is, we do have some data on which ones became winners. And then, of course, the winners are the ones that get implemented. And we're going to look at that next. Now, what happens, though, is 300 is a decent amount to do the statistics. Winners, of course, there are far fewer. and implementations are far fewer. So we're going to push it, but we're going to hit the limits of our data when we do that.
To see if the essence actually shows the right idea or not.
Absolutely, and when we look at the winners, we'll get a better choice on that. Well, great, thank you.